So I'm just going to show you in this here video how to initially set up Unreal 4, kind of go through the layout, the user interface, and then I'll show you how to import in a sprite sheet and extract the sprites from that. So obviously the first thing that you want to do is just Google download UE4 and you'll find a download page where you can register and then download the free version of Epic's Unreal 4. Now in the game labs we're using at the minute 4.12.5. What will happen is when you download UE4 it'll probably download the newest version, which is 4.13 at the minute. So what you want to do is in the launchpad, okay, is just go down to library and you can add a version, and then when you sign in you can choose what version that you want to download. So make sure that you're using 4.12.5 because that's the same versions that we're using in the university, and there might be some conflicts if you kind of change your project from one version to the other, so it's best to just stick with the same version throughout the one project. So I'm going to launch this. And what you're going to be presented with is, if you have some projects, it'll allow you to open them up depending if it's the right version or not. But what we're going to do is we're just going to set a new project. So in here we've got a load of templates that we can use, so like first person, flying, puzzle, twin stick shooter, that type of thing. But since we're doing a side scroller, we might as well use the side scroller template. Down here there are some options, so maximum quality type of thing. Use starter content. We're not going to use any of that, so make sure that you have no starter content. It just means the size of your project is going to be a lot smaller because the starter content is quite big and it's useless. You know, you're not going to put it in your game. The other thing that we're going to do is choose a folder where we're going to save this. So I'm going to put mine in my Google Drive if I can find it. I think I'll just put it on my desktop for now. And then I'm just going to call this tease test. And then you create your project. So it shouldn't take that long, especially if you've chosen not to have the starter content. And here we go. So this is Unreal 4, this is the editor for it, and this is the 2D side scroller template. Basically what it's using for this is a plugin called Paper 2D, which is quite good, and there's some advantages of using this over Unity, which I'll go into later on. So anybody that has ever used Unity, the layout may look different, but it is very, very similar. So on the top right hand corner we've got our world outliner, and this kind of outlines everything that's in our scene. So this would be exactly the same as you would have in our hierarchy in Unity. And then we've got this details panel, and this is context sensitive, so if I click on my guy there, you'll see it'll come up with all the options. This is kind of like a prefab in Unity, so it's got like a different components for it. We can go in and see what the components are and maybe change the settings. In Unreal 4 they're called blueprints, okay, so you can edit the blueprint from here, and that's what the scripting system is also called. On the bottom here is our content browser. It's kind of like your asset viewer in Unity. There's a few options here that I like to turn on. So the side panel just shows me my kind of folder structure that I have in it, and it's important that you do set up a proper folder structure in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just right click and I can add a folder, and I'm just going to call this sprites. You can also color code these as well, so if you right click it you can set a color. I can change this to red, and you can do that for anything really. On the left hand side, this is something that you probably don't have in Unity. It's just a panel where you can add in lights, visual effects, geometry, that type of thing. So it's kind of similar to Unity where you can like create an object, but it's just listed over here on the side. There's also a place where you can vertex paint, add in landscape, paint on foliage, and there's a geometry editing mode as well. But you'll not be using that in this 2D side scroller. At the top, we've got our save button, source control, which won't be present, content browser, which is down here, marketplace, so you can buy assets on there if you wish, settings, some of them might be helpful, especially if you don't have a really powerful PC or laptop. You can go down to the engine scalability settings and set that to kind of low or epic or high, whichever kind of works for you. Blueprints, so this is kind of where you can look at what blueprints are already in the project, and you can also open up the level blueprint. So this kind of like is individual and specific to each level. Cinematics, then you can add in like level sequencer or like adding in a matinee, and these are your build settings. So if you've got any light in the build or anything like that, you can do that in here. And then we've got our play settings. Okay, so this is where we can play it on our viewport. Or you want to, preview it on a mobile device or a new editor, something like that. You can do it all from here. And then this is our launch, okay, which I'll go into later on. So that's the kind of UI for Unreal 4, quite similar to Unity. So if you've never used Unreal 4 but you've used Unity, some things will kind of marry up and be the same. So to import some sprites, you can do it individually, but what I like to use are sprite sheets. So these are sheets that basically have all of our sprites contained in them, and they're kind of just easier to manage. So I've got two here, one for an environment, one for a character that I've just gotten online. Both are PNG. They've got like a transparent background. It's showing up as white here, but it is transparent. And it's pretty cool for Unreal because Unreal will recognize that and be able to extract the sprites out automatically for you. So I'm just going to go into my sprites folder. I'll actually change the color of my blueprints folder to blue. And I'll change my maps to a kind of orange color, just so that they're easier to recognize. Some of the sprites, I'm going to right click and I'm just going to import an asset. What it'll do is it'll try and locate your project folder, okay, and import from there. What I would suggest is that you keep like maybe an assets folder outside this project folder, because what Unreal 4 does is when it imports in like a sprite file, it will make a copy, okay, in this content folder as a .u asset. So you kind of like have a duplicate in your project file. So it's probably best to keep your main assets or your original assets outside this project folder. So I'm just going to go to my desktop and I'm going to select both of these and click and open. You can also drag and drop into here if you wish. Might be easier if you've got two screens to do that. So if I double click here and go in, you can see that I've got my sprites. Now one of the problems is when you bring in sprites, they're basically a texture. So what Unreal does is it compresses it as a texture, which kind of makes it lose some of its sharpness around the pixels. You can see it's kind of blurring in between them. So what we want to do is with both of these, we want to right click them and go to sprite actions and just apply paper 2D texture settings, okay? And when I go back in now, you can see that they're pinned sharp, okay? There's no compression taking place. So I'm going to do that with my other texture as well. So apply paper 2D texture settings. So these are actually textures, these aren't sprites yet. So what we want to do is extract these out. So I might actually make two folders for this because you can probably see we're going to have a lot of sprites for these, and then because of this writing or kind of individual, it'll take these as individual sprites as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a new folder, call it character, and make another folder and I'll just call it scene. And I'll put one into the other. So you just want to move them into the respective folders. And then what I'm going to do with the Mega Man one is right click it, sprite actions, and I'm going to extract sprites. Now if you did take in like a texture that only would contain one sprite, you could just go to create sprites, but since this is like a sprite sheet and contains many, I'm just going to use extract sprites. And you can see already that Unreal has picked up all the sprites for me, which is awesome. So all I have to do now is click extract. Another thing is, when you're using Unreal 4, do not use your home space folder for a project. Work outside that, even on your hard drive, because the home space might be slow, so it will crash Unreal 4. So just bear that in mind. So now you can see that I've got my texture here, which is underlined with red, and then I've got all my sprites, okay, which are underlined with this kind of teal blue color. And it does them automatically, spits them out. If I go back to my scene folder where I've got my environment sprites, I'm going to do the same here. So extract sprites. But you'll notice that since there isn't any gaps between these sprites, it doesn't pick up that these are individual, and it just thinks, oh, this is one whole sprite. So instead of doing it automatically, what we want to do is grid base. And I know that these sprites have been fitting in on a grid of 32 by 32. So I just want to change the cell width here by 32 to 32. And you can see now that it's marrying up perfectly. Okay, so we're going to have all these sprites extracted. So extract them, and those are our sprites extracted out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start deleting some of these default sprites that Unreal have put in. I'll leave the background in. And then what I can actually do is start dragging these sprites in. Now what you'll notice is when you automatically do that, it'll try and it'll pick a Y value. So if our player falls down when we press play now, he's just going to keep on falling. So what we want to do is make sure that these two are on the same Y plane, okay? So you can see when I click on my character here, the Y plane for that is like 13.4 or minus 13, which is kind of like a hard number to remember. So I always just put it to 0, and that'll move it up, and I'll put this here to 0 as well. You can see that when I click on items as well, that they'll have these widgets. If I tap space, I can cycle through them, or if I go up here, I can also grab them as well. And just like 3D software, if you press WER, you'll also get your kind of move, rotate, and scale. So I've got this now. I can move this over. Now the one thing that you want to make sure is that this is actually, you know, locking to 32, because when I duplicate this, what might happen is that they'll overlap, and you'll have two sprites that are kind of fighting to get rendered in this section, so they'll flicker, which isn't great. So what we want to do is maybe have like a grid snap size of 32, but by default there isn't one. So what we can do is we could go into editor preferences, into viewports, and then in here we've got grid snapping, and it's not showing all the options. You've got this kind of like show advanced. I'm going to drop those down, and then we've got decimal grid sizes, and at the minute you can see that we've got our defaults in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add an element, and I'm going to make it 32, and it will save automatically. So when you come out now, you'll see that I've got a 32 here down at the bottom. So it means when I move this over and duplicate it, it will snap perfectly. You're not going to get that ugly kind of like flicker between them. The duplicate as well, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can right click and duplicate, but the easiest way is if you have something selected, hold down Alt and move it over, and it will make a duplicate of that. Automatically, Unreal 4 sets up collisions on each sprite, so it should work automatically that we'll have our character sitting on top of that. So that's how to import sprites manually into the scene. There is another way, using a tile set and a tile sheet, which I'll show you later on. But the first thing we want to do now is we want to change this sprite. So this default character that we have at the minute, we kind of want to get rid of him and use our Omega Mime one. So I'm going to go into sprites. I'm going to go into character, and I kind of want to set up a few animations for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a few sprites in here which I think will go well as like an idle animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click this guy with his eyes open, and I'm going to create a flipbook. Okay, and I'm just going to call this idle flip, and you can see it's got like a light green underscore to it. If I can scale this up. So if I double click that, it's actually running through an animation, but since it's only got one frame, it's just repeating that. So what we want to do is, I'm just going to bring in another one where he's blinking, and this is going to look really stupid because it's really fast to start off with, but what we can do is we can extend these out. So it's playing the first scene. I might put that to So this is our idle animation. So again, all I had to do was right click on a sprite, create a flipbook, name it properly, and then drag in another sprite so it plays both of them. And you can see that my first sprite here, sprite 13, is playing for 12 frames, and then my sprite 12 where he's blinking is playing for 4 frames. And I can change them if I want, and I'll just save that. So we're going to do the same now, but we're going to do it for a run animation. And I've got these here 3, so sprite 15, 16, and 17. So I'm going to pick the first one, 15, create a flipbook, and I'm just going to call this run flip. Double click that. Again, it's only going to have one sprite in there. So what we want to do is go back up the top here. So I put 15 in there, I'm going to put 16, and then I'm going to put 17. And since he's going from legs open to legs closed, legs open, it's going to loop back to legs open again. I want to kind of have a legs closed in between this one and the first one again when it loops in, so I'm going to put this one in again. And then I'm going to probably let them run for like 2 or 3 frames each. Or I can make it run for 2. I think that's a bit too slow. There we go. So we've got a run animation going now. Press save. So we've got 2 flipbooks. We've got our idle one, and then we've also got down here our run one. You might want to make a separate folder for those flipbooks. So if I go to sprites, character, in there I could right click and make another folder for my flipbooks, just so it's easier to manage, because there's so many sprites in here that it's kind of hard to find your flipbooks. If you do kind of get lost, you can also use the search up here. So if I type in flip, it should find my 2 flipbooks. So that's kind of why I've used that naming convention. Makes things easier to find. So I'm going to edit this blueprint here. There's a few ways I can get into that. I could select it, right click, edit 2D side scroller character. I could select it here and go to edit blueprint, or I can select it here and go to word outliner and then select edit 2D side scroller on the right hand side, or I can find it in my blueprints folder and double click there. So there's a few ways that you can get to it. So basically what you're going to present it here is, this is the scripting for your character. So this is what makes it move, jump, collide, that type of thing. We've got a few other tabs up here. So my viewport one kind of shows me my blueprint hierarchy. So it shows me my capsule, my arrow that I'm kind of showing me what direction it's going, the sprite, camera boom, and my camera as well. And then my movement. So this is kind of all the attributes that dictate like how high it jumps, you know, how high a step has to be until it steps up, that type of thing. In the graph editor, again, so this is where all the scripting takes place. I'll just go through a few of these scripting. So this handles the animation, this here bit, so you can comment in scripting like you would do in like C# or anything like that. So this here is like a custom event. It's called update animation. Basically what it's doing is setting a flipbook, okay, and the target is our sprite component. Okay, so it's just going to change that sprite, and it's asking for a new flipbook here. Okay, and there's going to be two flipbooks that it can choose between. So it can choose false is idle, true is running, and it's what's dictating that is the velocity of the overall blueprint. So if it's moving, okay, it's going to be true, means that it's going to put in the running animation flipbook in here. Okay, so it's going to set that as a flipbook. If it's not moving, okay, so if the velocity is less or equal to 1, it's false, so it means it's idle, so it's going to set that idle one. At the minute it's using the default. What we could do is we can set our idle flipbook in here and our running one in here. And so if we compile and save that, if you make any changes in your blueprint, you're going to have to compile it and press play here. You'll see that I've got my character going. A few issues, so the collision box is too big, that's why he's standing in the air. And if we go back into our editor, by default it's still showing that blue guy. So I'm going to go to our viewport and we're going to make a few changes in here. So I'm going to select my sprite, and you can see it's still using that idle animation. So I'm going to choose our idle one, and this capsule here is our collision box. Again, you can see how big it is. So what we want to do is you just want to resize that up, okay, using these two options, so capsule half height and capsule radius. You'll notice that the capsule half height will only go so far depending on the radius, so you want to kind of switch between both of them until you're happy. So I think probably 22 and 18 will be good numbers in there. Compile, press play. You can see that I'm playing from a new window. If you want to do that as well, make sure you've got like new editor window selected. You can see now our character's collision is set up, and by default it will be showing the main character here as well. So a few other things. I just feel that the camera is too far away when we're moving. It's up to you on this, but if you want to make the camera closer, you can just choose the boom condition here. So if I select camera boom, and if I go to target arm length, I can change that, okay, and I'll just change the height of it back to 0 as well, so it's not coming down from an angle. So I'll probably go for 275 here to start off with. This won't make any differences to start off with, just because the camera itself, so the camera component here is set to orthographic, which just means that, you know, if you're ever using a 3D program and you're looking from the side view, objects don't scale dependent on distance. But if we switch this to perspective, press play now, you can see that we're a lot closer, probably too close. So I'm going to go to my camera boom and I'll set that to 325. Compile it, press play. Actually, that's probably too close again, so I'll just make it 450. Compile it, save it, press play. Cool, that's fine. So one of the things I probably want to change as well is the jump height. So if I go to my character movement and I type in jump, you can see we've got our jump Z velocity, and I'm just going to change that to something like 750. Okay, compile, press play. That's probably a lot better. You can also go into the character movement and switch the gravity scale maybe to 3 or something like that if you think it's too floaty. You can kind of go into these options until you kind of have something that feels right. So again, that's probably a bit too much, so I'll probably go 2.5 on that. Compile, probably. So that's your basics on Unreal 4, how to import sprite sheets, set them up, how to set up your character, your camera boom, and just get the initial setup for your 2D side scroller so it's working. You can take that further and make a level out of whatever sprites that you want. You'll have a few in here under scene. You can make some platforms. In the next video I'll show you how to animate those platforms as well.